Hey everyone, I just wanted to make a quick video on what I consider the best decks in the game and the decks that are meta defining right now. There might be some other versions of decks that are good too, but nobody's playing them. For example, people Highlander Warrior seems decent, but it's just not nearly as good as Cycle Odin Warrior, and no one's playing it. But it's not, a bad deck. But when there's such a better version of a deck, I'm not going to really include it. So we've got the sort of the best decks in the game. There's 4 of them that are kind of defining the meta, and then pretty much everything else is just falling off on the wayside. So at tier S, we have hand buff Paladin. There's both a hand buff version and an excavate version. You can see here. So this hand buff version, is we've got the South Sea deckhands and the Leroy. We do not have the excavation package. It's just all buffs and cycle. Very, very strong right now. Next we've got and then we've got the excavate version, which doesn't have the South Seas but has the Leroy. And has things like Living Horizon, which is really strong, and the excavate package, so a little bit more value, a little less aggressive. I feel I'm not exactly sure which one is better. They both have an absurd win rate. I'm guessing the one that wins out will ultimately be the one that's favored in the mirror. I feel like these Living Horizons are actually insane in this deck right now. I hate playing against them. I could see the main version moving into Living Horizons, but not many people, I haven't seen anyone doing that yet, but this card feels really good. So both these decks, if you want to get the easiest legend of your life, there's never been a time to do it. You don't need to be a good player right now, as long as you know how to play this card and then just keep playing cards. All right. Your opponent gets ahead, use Tiger plushies. You just spend your mana every turn and make sure you play Painter's Virtue, and that will get you to legend. You don't need to know much. Just spend your mana and play Painter's Virtue. It's an insane deck. I posted the build here on my YouTube. Ridiculously good. And you don't need to understand Hearthstone that much. Like, you just need to play the Painter's Virtue and just keep playing cards, and you will win. Your opponent might remove them once. You play them again, they die. Like, it's that simple. So next, we've got the tier 1s. These 3 decks, these are all tier 1 right now. And after this, I think after these 4 decks, I think things are going to get a lot weaker. But we've got the Wheel Warlock. This is the build I've been playing. I switched from the 4-Trop to Elemental Geodes, the Speaker, because there's not, when you're playing against these 3 decks, there's just not much of a benefit of that, where the Speaker in the right meta could be, I think, really good. But I looked at the stats comparing the Elemental Geodes and the Speakers, and they're very similar. I did see somebody talking about they're running the 3-mana spell, the Fire spell, that when discarded draws 2 cards. There's a case for running that card instead of the Elemental Geode. That's something I could eventually test, but right now I haven't really done that. But that's an option. And the Cycle Odin Warrior, this card deck is insane. They just can get through everything. So this is the build I think that is the most popular at high legend right now, that's doing really well, and it is pretty insane. And if it and it does beat Wheel Warlock just by a little bit. I think Wheel Warlock's probably like 47% into this. So when if Excavate Paladin wasn't dominating so hard, this would be ridiculous. And then next we've got Zoo Hunter, sort of or Token Hunter. This deck is really, really strong. You could absolutely dominate with this deck to legend. The reason it's not tier S is because it loses to these decks. But the reason it is tier 1 is it's the only deck that beats these decks. So and this deck is just not just like a counter to the meta. It's to the best deck. It's just insanely good overall. So definitely a tier 1 deck. I can't recommend this deck more to get to legend. Only reason I would say to place anything else is because Paladin exists. So really it's your playstyle, but this deck is insane. Develop stuff, use RC Rampage, do big saddle ups. This deck is just so freaking good. Then after that, we have 2 tier 3 decks. these decks are good because like they're kind of okay overall. They're doing a weak meta, and they beat one of the decks in here, but they're not good enough to. But they're not even tier 2. They're losing to most of the stuff right now. These 4 decks are so strong. They're kind of sort of dominating the meta. But this is the Demon Hunter list, except I think we're running Argus in this list, where my list wasn't, because my list on my YouTube is a little bit more budget friendly. But this list basically is just very good overall, but it happens to lose to these 3, but it really crushes Wheel Warlock. So I think it went 4-0 against Wheel Warlock. I've seen the stats. It's one of the best decks against Wheel Warlock in the game. So if Wheel got out of control, hitting him in the face, really good. And then we've got Plague Death Knight. Plague Death Knight, interesting enough, does not beat Wheel Warlock, which is why it is tier 3. If it did beat Wheel Warlock, it'd actually be a very good deck. Would just be losing to Paladin. But Plague Death Knight crushes Odin Warrior because of the cycle. But it does not beat Wheel Warlock. I think it's a 45%, and then it loses to Excavate Paladin pretty hard, and it loses to Zoo Hunter pretty hard. So, but it is a deck that on the climb, it still has a very good win rate overall. But that's, as the meta gets more and more defined, it's going to get worse and worse. So that's why it is tier 3 and not tier 2 or tier 1, even though you might be doing quite well with it. So these are the decks. Any of these decks are a deck that you can easily get legend with. But if you want to really easily get legend with, you go Paladin. If you want to kind of easily, but all these decks are decks that you can play poorly, but with some basic skills, and still definitely get legend. They're very strong decks. Remember, tier 3, from my point of view, is a good deck, but that still doesn't quite make it in the highest tier of the meta when everyone's playing competitively. But a tier 3 deck is a good deck. If you play one of these tier 3 decks right now, until the meta gets more refined, you're still going to crush it if you're a decent player. So anyways, hope to see you guys on the ladder, and hope you enjoyed these deck lists.